The sudden collapse and the silence. May 1945, the final days of the Third Reich brought not a decisive last stand in the air, but a sudden total implosion. The war ends and the Luftwaffe collapses overnight. Across the ruined landscape of Europe, thousands of German aircraft sit abandoned, from the classic fighters that once dominated the Battle of Britain to the cutting-edge jets and secret, unfinished prototypes. In the eerie silence of the surrender, the airfields were frozen in time. Row upon row of gray, unmoving aircraft, their canopies glazed with dust and their propellers stationary, sat where they had run out of fuel, a silent, ghost fleet waiting for orders that would never come. The Allies suddenly control technology years ahead of its time, and a silent, desperate race begins to capture, study, or destroy everything they find. In early May 1945, as Germany formally surrendered, the Luftwaffe had effectively ceased to function. Aircraft were abandoned on airfields from the Danish border all the way to Austria. Some were intact, ready to fly. Others were stripped for parts or damaged by bombing raids. Fuel shortages, scattered command structures, and destroyed infrastructure had grounded many units for weeks before the final capitulation. By the time the ceasefire took effect on May 8th, thousands of aircraft remained exactly where they were parked. They stood as silent, damning evidence of a force that once dominated the skies over Europe. Across northern Germany, key sites such as Flensburg and Lübeck held large numbers of aircraft, intact, damaged or unfinished in open fields and sprawling hangars. In Prague, hangars were filled with Messerschmitts, Heinkels, and late-war prototypes, some still in their factory primer, awaiting final fittings. At Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's main secret testing center, Allied investigators found a treasure trove: experimental airframes, massive wind tunnel models, and technical documents that revealed the staggering scope of Germany's jet, rocket, and hypersonic research. The sheer variety of surviving aircraft surprised many Allied officers. Alongside classic, well-known types like the Messerschmitt Bf-109 and the Focke-Wulf Farchi-190, they found revolutionary innovations such as the twin-engine Arado R-234 jet bomber and the tiny, disposable Heinkel Heer 162 Volksjäger, People's Fighter. They also discovered the remains of bizarre projects, including the swept-wing Junkers Ju-287 bomber. Transport and reconnaissance aircraft, including the ubiquitous Junkers Ju-52, Tante Ju, and the Heinkel He-111, were scattered across every minor airfield as well. Many units had simply run out of fuel in the war's final weeks, leaving machines parked and untouched, the keys still in the ignition. By the time the fighting ended, the Luftwaffe's administrative structure had completely collapsed. Commanders surrendered to whichever Allied forces they encountered, and ground crews often abandoned posts without orders. Aircraft maintenance records, fuel depots, and crucial spare parts stores were either incomplete or destroyed, adding layers of complication to the massive task facing the victors. The Allied Control Commission, ACC, quickly imposed strict rules. All German aircraft were immediately grounded, and no German pilot could fly without direct Allied authorization. These measures were essential to prevent unauthorized flights, escape attempts by senior officials, or the movement of sensitive technical equipment. To the race for technology, lusty and surgeon. A fierce, silent debate soon emerged within Allied command about what should be preserved and what should be destroyed. Some officers argued that leaving German aircraft intact posed a security risk. Others saw their immense potential for research. What became clear immediately was that the fate of the Luftwaffe's planes was now a matter of intelligence, logistics, and emerging political calculation. As soon as Germany surrendered, the Allies began large-scale, clandestine recovery programs to seize the Luftwaffe's most advanced aircraft. The United States moved with characteristic speed and aggression. On May 8, 1945, a day after the formal capitulation, American intelligence teams launched Operation Lusty, a clever acronym for Luftwaffe Secret Technology. Led by the determined Colonel Harold Watson, these small, mobile teams spread across the American occupation zones of Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. Their mission was clear: locate advanced aircraft, secure technical documents, and most importantly, transport selected machines back to America for exhaustive testing. At Lechfeld in Germany, American forces secured several intact Messerschmitt Me-262 jets, the world's first operational jet fighter, at Grove Airfield in Denmark. They found Arado jet bombers and a mix of other late-war prototypes. Aircraft deemed most valuable were either flown by captured German pilots under Allied escort or carefully dismantled for shipment. They went to the vast Wright Field Testing Center in Ohio or to Freeman Field in Indiana, where specialist evaluation units cataloged equipment, engines, and advanced design features. Pilots from the Watson's Whizzers Flight Group had the extraordinary opportunity to test fly the captured jets under controlled conditions. Their reports instantly shaped the early American understanding of swept wings, jet propulsion, and high-speed aerodynamics, giving birth to the next generation of U.S. air power. The British launched a parallel effort known as Operation Surgeon. Unlike the Americans, who primarily focused on capturing physical hardware, the British were equally interested in the human capital, the engineers, scientists, and technicians who had built the machines. Teams from the Royal Aircraft Establishment, RAE, moved into airfields at Fassberg, Schleswig, Husum, and Rechlin, intensely interviewing surviving personnel and gathering every technical document they could find. Selected experts were transferred to British facilities for post-war work and debriefing. At RAF Farnborough, test pilots flew captured aircraft, including the Me-262, to better understand its strengths and weaknesses, specifically targeting lessons that could be integrated into their own nascent jet programs. The British were particularly interested in the lightweight, simple design of the Heinkel He-162, whose construction offered lessons for future trainers and cheap interceptors. The Soviet Union also moved quickly and brutally. Their dedicated trophy brigades seized entire factories and airfields across the territories they occupied: Saxony, Thuringia, Silesia, and Czechoslovakia. Major production centers, such as the Avia Works in Prague and the Bf-109 assembly lines in Moravia, fell under immediate Soviet control. Aircraft were shipped east by rail, along with the crucial tooling equipment and the captured engineers themselves. At air bases near Moscow and Leningrad, Soviet pilots and designers meticulously examined the Me-262 and R-234, integrating their findings into early Soviet jet projects like the MiG-9 and the Yak-15. 3. Political tensions and the global impact. Competition soon emerged among the Allies. Each power desperately wanted access to the rarest aircraft, especially one-of-a-kind prototypes that existed only in small numbers. There were sharp disagreements and tense standoffs over which side had the right to certain machines, particularly at key sites in Central Germany, where American and Soviet forces arrived only days apart. The Allied Control Council, ACC, attempted to coordinate collection efforts, but the tensions reflecting the early Cold War divisions were already dramatically visible. The pursuit of the Luftwaffe's Ghost Fleet became the first proxy battle of the new global conflict. German personnel played an unexpectedly important role in these programs. Former pilots, mechanics, and engineers answered technical questions, sometimes under supervision and sometimes as part of temporary employment agreements. Their explanations were essential for Allied teams to understand and operate complex German systems such as the revolutionary Jumo 004 and BMW 003 jet engines, and the advanced navigation equipment. The Allies documented everything: thousands of photographs, millions of blueprints, flight manuals, and test reports. This massive paper trail was created before the critical decision was made on which aircraft to keep and which to destroy. By late 1946, the major collection efforts were largely complete. Dozens of the most advanced aircraft had been shipped to the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union for testing. These programs directly shaped early jet development across the globe, setting the stage for the next inevitable phase: the systematic destruction of everything that remained. Heth, the Great Scrapping, 1945-1948. By late 1945, the Allied Control Council delivered its final ruling. Germany could not retain any military aircraft. The few hundred most valuable examples had already been shipped abroad. The thousands that remained, an overwhelming surplus, were marked for total destruction, turning airfields across Europe into vast Mechanized scrapyards between 1945 and 1948. The directive was simple and absolute. Every German aircraft, fighters, bombers, transports, trainers, and prototypes had to be eliminated unless specifically reserved for research or museum purposes. Bases such as Flensburg, Lübeck, Blankensee, Grove, and Tarnowick became the primary disposal hubs. Allied crews, often using heavy machinery and simple axes, stripped and crushed the airframes, feeding the valuable aluminum and steel back into Europe's war-torn rebuilding industries. At Grove, long, desolate rows of fighters were systematically dismantled. Across northern Germany, British teams destroyed intact bombers that had survived the war unscathed. Even late war jets were broken down, unless they had already been assigned to a test program. Some aircraft were burned in massive pits or loaded onto barges and deliberately sunk along the coast. Many of these underwater wrecks still lie where they fell, occasionally rediscovered by divers and marine researchers. The loss to history was immense. Several researchers argue that many historically unique aircraft, built in single prototypes or rare variants, were lost during this period simply because no museums or archives had the space or the foresight to store them. Allied priorities were rooted in demilitarization, not preservation, and the political desire to dismantle Germany's war machine outweighed all other concerns about historical value. The limited number of surviving Luftwaffe aircraft today is a direct, tragic result of this mass disposal phase. Economic factors also shaped the destruction process. Metal shortages across Europe meant that aluminum and steel from Luftwaffe aircraft were incredibly valuable resources. Recycling airframes helped supply industries producing consumer goods, infrastructure materials, and essential machinery for recovery. For many local German workers, scrapping aircraft provided stable employment during a challenging transition period. By 1948, the vast majority of Luftwaffe aircraft no longer existed. The runways that once hosted major fighter units and bomber groups were cleared or repurposed. Some became training grounds for Allied occupation forces. Others reverted to farmland or became the sites of new civilian airports. A second life under foreign flags. Even as most Luftwaffe aircraft were dismantled after 1945, a small number entered a second, brief life under foreign flags. From 1946 onwards, several countries operated German-designed aircraft out of sheer necessity, immediate availability, or technical interest. These fleets were often short-lived due to maintenance and spare parts issues, but they played an important role in early post-war aviation. Czechoslovakia became one of the first nations to actively repurpose German equipment. Factories in Prague, Kunovík, and Letňany held both completed aircraft and partially finished airframes, which Czech engineers rapidly assembled into operational fighters. The most famous result was the Avia S-199, a Messerschmitt Bf 109 airframe hastily fitted with a heavy Junkers engine. Though notoriously difficult to fly, the S-199 equipped the Czechoslovak Air Force until newer Soviet aircraft replaced it. Crucially, several were later sold to Israel, becoming the new nation's first fighter aircraft in 1948, and helping secure their independence. Spain also extended the legacy of German fighters. Under licensed agreements dating back to the late 1930s, Spanish factories produced the Hispano Aviación HA-1112, a modified Bf-109 design fitted with Spanish-made engines. These aircraft served in the Spanish Air Force until the mid-1950s. Their most famous appearance came decades later when they were used to portray German fighters in classic films, such as the Battle of Britain, a final cinematic irony. Civilian aviation also benefited indirectly from surviving German technology. The robust Junkers, Ju-52, transitioned into passenger service in several countries. In France, the Toucan variant was produced at the Amiot factories and used extensively in colonial transport roles. Lufthansa briefly operated Ju-52s in the early 1950s before finally shifting to modern, newly built aircraft. By the time West Germany established the Bundeswehr Luftwaffe in 1956, none of the old Luftwaffe aircraft were considered for operational use. The new Air Force relied on Allied-built designs such as the F-84, Thunderstreak, the Canadair Sabre, and the later F-104 Starfighter. German aviation culture had irrevocably moved into the jet age, leaving wartime designs and their fraught legacy behind. The fragmented legacy. Efforts to preserve surviving airframes grew significantly in the second half of the 20th century. Many of today's museum pieces come from unexpected places: remote crash sites, cold lake beds, or long-buried wrecks recovered from the Eastern Front. Restorers often had to combine parts from multiple aircraft to painstakingly create a single, historically accurate display model. In the modern era, only a small number of intact Luftwaffe aircraft still exist. Pristine examples of the Me-262, the Bf-109, the FW-190, and the rare Arado R-234 sit as priceless artifacts in museums from Washington, D.C. to Berlin. A few privately built replicas fly at air shows, recreating the sound and sight of the piston and early jet eras. But almost all original wartime airframes remain forever grounded. What survives today is only a fragment of the vast force once spread across Europe. They stand as silent reminders of how quickly even the most advanced machines can vanish in the wake of political collapse, and how the post-war world violently reshaped the physical legacy of German aviation.